There we go. Okay. And we'll step to this slide. So where we're at in the process right now is we've developed a noise abatement and program management and land use management plan. As you can see there, we are here. Kind of our next steps there, looking into developing the documentation and getting approval there on the noise compatibility program and NEMs. Step forward here. As I mentioned, public involvement opportunities within the study process. So we have an advisory committee that's made up of a group of stakeholders that are either affected by or have some type of oversight responsibilities for issues covered by the Part 150 study updates. So that includes airport authority officials, aircraft operators, government officials, community groups, as well as FAA traffic controllers. We have also public workshops, which you are participating in right now, which they're more of an open house informational meeting to discuss and gather comments on the aviation noise and land use or mitigation measures. So we have also a public hearing. The public hearing is kind of the last meeting that we'll have, and this is really to receive those formal public comments, either oral or written, from the public on the Part 150 study document itself. And we also have the project website that the public can use. The public can log on to the website. We have the meetings are posted there with the videos of the meetings and all the slides throughout the meetings. And we also have an ability there to email the project team. So you can always comment or send the team an email on there. We'll go ahead now and take a break here real quick. Does anybody have any types of questions or comments there on kind of some of the background information that we went over on Part 150 studies themselves? Right. I do not see any hands raised. We'll go ahead and move on. As I mentioned, we had previously discussed the future and existing noise contours. What we're showing you here is the 2027 forecasted noise exposure contours. So these contours use some type of operational forecast that looks into a future time to see what type of growth would occur at the airport. We use that as the input into the model, and then we determine the number of homes that are within the 65 DNL noise contour. That 65 DNL noise contour is the FAA's significant threshold contour. So homes that are inside of that contour are available for some type of mitigation. So we'll go a little bit more in depth here on the types of elements there for a noise compatibility program. So as I mentioned, there was the noise abatement measures. The purpose of noise abatement is to abate the noise levels in the surrounding communities. And you can do this through the moving of the location of the flight tracks, so where the aircraft are flying, adjusting the runway use at the airport, flight management, ground activity restrictions, and then, of course, facility modifications, which would be additional runways or lengthening a runway, something along that manner. And then we also have land use mitigation, and that is to mitigate the noise levels in the surrounding communities. So, as I mentioned, there were two types of land use mitigation. One is a preventative type, so that really deals with preventing the encroachment of new incompatible land uses around the airport. And that's done by multiple avenues, one being some type of land use constraints, or even just the airport working with the communities and the planning groups around the airport to to ensure that no new incompatible development is going to be occurring in the close proximity of the airport. Then you also have remedial and corrective. So this is essentially types of sound insulation, navigation easements, and or purchase options for the properties. And then finally, we have program management measures, and that is to provide administrative and management actions that help the airport run and maintain the land use compatibility in the surrounding communities. So things like noise complaint protocols, management of the noise program, and just doing regular updates of the NEMs and the NCPs as the airport's doing now. So want to go over real quick the previously approved noise abatement measures. So I have mentioned that noise compatibility studies have been going on at Rockford since the early 90s. So a lot of these items that are in here have been developed over time and have kind of changed throughout time based on the level of traffic and the aircraft. So as time progressed, the fleet progressed, the airspace progressed, some of these items were also changed, and we'll actually go into what types of changes we're proposing this go around for the noise abatement measures. So the first measure there that is approved is maintaining an existing noise abatement procedures for the tower order of June 15, 1984. Essentially, this leads into doing touch and go traffic at the airport and pilot training, and where those routes should occur, which is to the south and west of the airport. It was mainly geared toward C-130 traffic. So in the early 90s, there was a lot of C-130s that came to the airport to do training. So these were these noise abatement measures and procedures were put in place for that kind of traffic. Today, the airport doesn't really experience that type of transient traffic anymore. And we have another noise abatement measure that is directly related to touch and go traffic and pilot training. So we're going to recommend to withdraw NA1 for an updated measure later on. NA3, this deals with aircraft that are departing runway 7. So these would be aircraft that are departing to the northeast over Rockford. And essentially they have all departures should be fanned along 3 departure tracks, a left, a right, and a center track. And that is recommended to be continued. So the basic premise of that is not all of the airplanes are just departing straight out for a long distance. They're actually dispersing the traffic as soon as possible to their destination. So there's no one real highway of departures. NA4, direct pilots of C-130s to turn as tightly as practical when training on runway 19. As I mentioned, the airport doesn't really have C-130 traffic anymore, not to the amount that would require a noise abatement measure. So we're going to recommend this to be withdrawn. The next measure is NA7 and NA12. I combine these because they're essentially the same measure. NA7 deals with nighttime hours, which are 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. And NA12 deals with the daytime hours, which are 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Essentially, what these noise abatement measures are doing there is for any aircraft that are over 12,500 pounds that are departing runway 25 and they have a right turn departure course, it's having those aircraft turn as soon as practicable. So really the intent there is for aircraft to turn before the Woodcrest Estates, which is kind of southwest there of the runway 25 end. Noise abatement measures NA8 and NA13. Again, these are two measures that are identical, just one deals with daytime, one deals with nighttime. This is essentially any aircraft over 12,500 pounds that are departing runway 25 and have a left turn departure course that they would turn as soon as practicable. And again, that is to avoid the Woodcrest Estates neighborhood to the southwest of the airport. Noise abatement measure 9, it deals with nighttime hour aircraft over 12,500 pounds again. This is departing runway 19, and it is departure courses that have a left turn, and then it would essentially have those aircraft stay on their runway heading until reaching 3,000 feet before making their turn on the course. So really that is implemented to not allow the aircraft to turn immediately after departure. There are quite a few homes in that area. This one was actually geared a little bit more towards Black Hawk Island. There were a lot of homes there that were impacted. The airport has since purchased quite a few of those homes, but we are recommending this measure to continue with modifications, though. NA10 is the establishment of an informal preferential runway use plan for all daytime and nighttime operations after runway 725 was extended. This was implemented as conditions allow, and there is a current informal preferential runway use plan. So we are recommending that to be continued. And then for NA11, for all aircraft requiring more than 8,000 feet certified takeoff length, runway 25 is preferred. So in the preferential runway use plan, runway 25 is not the preferred departure runway, but for any aircraft that require that 8,000 foot runway length or greater, they would have to use 25 would be the preferred departure runway there. NA14 is aircraft weighing more than 12,500 pounds to conduct touch and go and low approach training activity on the south side of the airport when using runway 7 or 25. This is the touch and go noise abatement measure that I mentioned previously. It's currently implemented. We're recommending to continue this with some modifications to kind of be more all-inclusive of all touch and go traffic. There's not a lot of aircraft that are 12,500 pounds that are doing touch and goes at the airport. Again, this was more of a C-130 and transit military noise abatement measure, and the airport doesn't really experience those. So we're going to modify this to be a little bit more all-inclusive of all touch and go traffic. NA15, this is for nighttime hours for all aircraft that are over 12,500 pounds, departing runway 1 to maintain that runway heading until reaching 3,000 feet before turning on course. So this is for departures there to the south of the airport, and it's wanting them to stay on that runway heading until they get past areas like the Kishwaukee River, where there's a lot of homes and neighborhoods just to the east there on the river. And this actually has the aircraft kind of fly a little bit more south and use the forest preserve there to make that turn back to the east. The final one there is encouraging the use of noise attenuating construction standards for all new on-airport structures and facilities, and really to use those facilities as noise barriers or buffers to any of the adjacent communities. So that would help reduce noise as well. And this is a map that kind of shows you how all of those noise abatement measures that are actually controlling, recommending where aircraft fly, how they look on the map. So we can see that we have the 3 departure courses there for runway 07 departures. You can see runway 25 departures. the two measures there that guide the right turns before Woodcrest Estates, and then the two that do the left turns for Woodcrest Estates. And as well, we have the 0119 departures where we're asking them they would stay on that runway heading until 3,000 feet before making their turns. So that's kind of a visual representation of all of those noise abatement measures and how they're used at the airport. We'll go ahead and take a break here. Did anyone have any questions? Check the Q&A. I don't have anything in the Q&A and no hands are raised. But if anybody would like to ask any questions or talk about the noise abatement measures that are currently in place and how those are operating, then feel free to raise your hand or type a message in chat and we can respond to that. Go ahead and give everybody a minute here, see if any hands raised. Okay. We can go ahead and move on here. So noise abatement screening, what we look at here are different options to add to the noise abatement measures. We look at several different items, as I mentioned before: flight tracks, runway use, facility changes. So this is the screening that we provided to see if there were any potential new noise abatement measures that would reduce impacts within that 65 DNL contour. First, we looked at modifying the arrival and departure flight tracks. So that could have some potential in certain areas, but it would not reduce the noise impacts there for the 65 DNL contour. And there's several currently approved measures that already address departure flight track dispersion and turn locations. So NA 1, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 12, 13, 14, and 15 are all kind of geared toward where the aircraft flight tracks are and where those routes exist. For arrivals, those are a little bit harder just for the fact that they're on their final approach for some distance before the airport. So you can't really move that final approach anywhere. Where the departures, once they depart, we can try to get them away from populated areas as quickly as possible. So we are not recommending any type of flight track modifications, so not moving any of the traffic. Runway use modifications, we looked at increasing the usage of runway 0119. So that could have the potential to reduce noise within the 65 DNL. And essentially shrink the contour that is due to the traffic on 0725. Some of the drawbacks for that is the majority of the operations are still going to need to use runway 725 just based on the length of the runway and the size of the aircraft. They're still going to need to use 725. And also increasing any of the arrivals to runway N1 and departures from runway N19 could have some type of potential impact in the areas to the north and south of the airport. And as we know, to the north of the airport is the heart of Rockford. So the least amount of traffic that we can fly over Rockford is beneficial for the airport. So we're not recommending to increase the usage of that 0119 runway. The next three are different types of profiles. The first being the optimized profile descent procedure. And this does have some beneficial aspects to it. And it's used at airports to reduce approach noise at a distance from the airport. Really, the most beneficial aspect to those types of procedures are a reduction in fuel burn and air emissions. However, due to the impacted home's location, as we've seen in that 2027 contour, they are really close to the runway ends and right off the runway where the optimized profile descent approach would not be changing where what altitude the aircraft are flying at that close to the runway. So based on not being able to provide any benefits to the homes within that 65 DNL contour, we're not going to recommend this for further analysis, any type of optimized profile descent approaches. The next two are a distant noise abatement and a close-in noise abatement departures. For the distant noise abatement departure procedures, they have benefits for areas that are kind of further away from the airport, so greater than 3 miles. All of our impacts to homes within the 65 DNL are closer than 3 miles, so we wouldn't really gain any benefits to the homes in that 65 DNL contour with any distant noise abatement procedures there. So we're not recommending any of those procedures for further analysis. The close-in departure procedures, they usually reduce noise for areas that are really close in proximity to the runway, typically that less than the 3 miles. And they can potentially, however, on the drawbacks, they can potentially increase noise for areas that are farther away from the airport. And really, due to the fleet mix at Rockford, a lot of the aircraft would not have the capability to execute these close-in noise abatement departure procedures. So based on the limited amount of use that these procedures would get, and the actual increases in noise away from the airport, we're not recommending those procedures for further analysis. The last one there, this was actually an abatement measure that we looked at based on a comment from the first public workshop, and that would be to moderate the reverse thrust on landings. So this reduces the amount of noise from the application of reverse thrust on the landing. So it can't be eliminated altogether, and it would be really up to the discretion of the pilot whether to kind of use this reverse thrust concept. However, due to the location of the homes and the amount of anticipated participation from pilots in using reverse thrust, and the amount of aircraft that could use the reverse thrust, the moderating or reducing that reverse thrust would be really low, and it's really not going to provide a lot of benefits to those folks that are within that 65 DNL contour. So we would not recommend that for further analysis. Airport facility modifications, extending runway 119. So if runway 119 was extended, there would be additional aircraft in the Rockford fleet that would be able to access that runway due to needing that extended length of 0725. If 119 was extended, it could have the capability to handle more aircraft, some of the larger aircraft on departures. Drawbacks there, though, new residential areas to the north and the south of the airport could be impacted by that 65 DNL contour. They would most obviously get some type of noise increase from that. Also, some of the existing buildings and roadways to the north, the Koswaki River and existing railroad to the south, they really limit the potential length of runway 119. And the cost benefit of such a project is really not practical. It could be, a $50 to $100 million project to extend that runway. So based on the limitations of the measure of the final runway length and the potential to impact new communities, the runway 119 extension would not be recommended as part of the noise abatement procedures there. The last one there, ground run-up enclosures. So this can reduce jet run-up noise levels by up to 20 dB, and this is really for aircraft that are parked on the ground with their engines running, and they're doing some type of maintenance activity on that aircraft. So currently, however, there's not really a significant amount of jet aircraft maintenance activities that would justify that cost benefit for constructing these ground run-up enclosures. It would also be, there would not be really a significant impact on that 65 DNL, and the folks within there would not experience a significant reduction in noise. So we're not recommending that for further analysis. The final one there, airport facility restrictions. So implementing airport operational restrictions, it's the Part 161 restrictions, such as noise and time-based landing fees, airport capacity restrictions, based on the relative noisiness of an aircraft. This can resolve noise and annoyance issues with certain loud aircraft events or aircraft types operating at Rockford. However, such restrictions would be subject to a very costly and time-consuming analytical requirement under Federal Aviation Regulations Part 161, and the FAA has never officially approved such measures. It would also have severe financial ramifications both to the airport and the region if certain aircraft were not allowed to operate at the airport. So based on these restrictions and the drawbacks there to the airport, the region, and the unlikelihood of the FAA approving any measures, we're not recommending the facility restrictions for further analysis. So kind of in summary there for our noise abatement recommendations, we have 5 measures that are recommended to be continued. We have 6 measures that are recommended to be continued with modifications. And we have 2 measures recommended to be withdrawn from the noise compatibility program. Currently, the implemented noise abatement measures reduce those impacts within the 65 DNL noise contour to the fullest extent possible. And we'll go ahead and take a break. I know that was a lot of info to consume right there. So if anybody has any questions or comment, please raise your hand or type those into the Q&A, and we can go ahead and answer any of those questions or talk about the comments. Check this real quick, make sure we do have something in Q&A. So Allison Holman asked, how can we find out if we are within the bounds of the 65 DNL contour? So here shortly, I'm going to be showing kind of where those bounds are. We did have a slide up here at the very beginning, though. Let me back up a little ways. Almost there, I think. So this is the 2027 NCP noise contour. And we use this noise contour to determine mitigation in the future. So any types of land use mitigation or any type of remedial or corrective mitigation and noise abatement measures. So you can see there's 2 areas where we were the 65 DNL contour impacted incompatible or residential properties. First, to the south of 0725, this is the Woodcrest Estates. So the 65 DNL contour goes through there. And then to the northeast of the airport, we have a neighborhood right here. This is Valley Pines. It's quite a few duplexes there in that neighborhood. We have some homes along Samuelson Road, and then homes along Radnor Drive, Wellington Street, and Chesterfield Avenue right here that were within that 65 DNL contour. But as you'll see later, we actually we do look outside of the 65 DNL contour when considering mitigation options, and we'll go through that shortly. A little too far there, didn't I? Okay. Here we go. Okay. And looks like Allison, we are located at the intersection of 20th and Samuelson. So I believe 20th and Samuelson, I don't believe that would be inside the 65 DNL contour. I would really have to look there and confirm, but I believe that's a little bit east of that 65 DNL contour. So previously approved land use mitigation measures. So there's quite a few land use mitigation measures that are part of the current noise compatibility program. Oh, we'll go ahead and take a break here. Someone has a hand up, so we'll go ahead and let's see, participants, attendees. Go ahead and unmute. Kathy, you are unmuted. If you want to unmute your, yep, there you go. And you're free to speak.
What about the Stormont Highlands subdivision that's north at Montague and Meridian? I see it on your map. It's an up and coming growing subdivision, and I'm not entirely sure what I'm looking at when I'm looking at the screen previous to this one.
Okay, so let me back up real quick here to the
So
tour itself.
What were the?
Jesse, we'll have zoomed in shots coming up here shortly. It might be easier.
We will.
To see it than these screenshots.
Yep. So I believe Kathy, where you're referencing is this area right in here.
North, right at Montague and Meridian. I think NA4 and NA7 are the ones that are coming over.
NA4 and NA7. Let's go, maybe that'll help. So NA7 and NA12 there.
7 and 12. 7 and 12.
Yep. So this area kind of to the north west of the airport there.
Yes.
Right. So yeah, that's actually not within that 65 DNL contour.
Okay.
65 kind of ends somewhere right in here. But yeah, you definitely experience the departure traffic there from runway 25. And I believe I've received an email from you in the past about those departures and the amount of noise that they make and when they're occurring. But there are limitations to kind of what the airport can do in these instances as far as mitigation. That 65 DNL kind of is that area where the FAA allows for the airport to provide that mitigation and get funding for it. So those areas that are kind of extended and away from the airport wouldn't be offered any type of sound insulation at their homes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And go ahead. And all right, back up here. Okay, so the land use mitigation measures. Currently approved land use mitigation measures, we have an LU2, which is adopting a noise overlay zoning, prohibiting development of different types of noise sensitive land uses within that 60 to 65 DNL noise contour of the 2008 noise exposure maps. This was approved. However, to date, only Ogle County zoning ordinances have incorporated the RFD NCP into their ordinances. And those were updated in 2021, but they continue to reference the 1994 NCP. So we would recommend the airport reaching out to Ogle County, having them maybe update that language in their next update to their zoning ordinances to reference this new set of 2022, 2027 noise exposure maps. And that would be the modification that we're recommending for that land use measure, as well as to use those new noise exposure maps. LU4 is to amend local comprehensive plans by adopting the updated Part 150 NCP as their noise compatibility elements for the city of Rockford and Ogle and Winnebago counties. To date, though, only Ogle County comprehensive plans have historically incorporated the RFD NCP. However, that language is no longer included in the 2012 comprehensive plan for Ogle County. Language related to continuing an active presence in RFD activities is included, however, though. So they do have some language in there that directs the county officials to kind of continue an active presence there with any type of Rockford airport activities. We would recommend that this be continued and a modification of including those 2022, 2027 noise exposure maps in there. Adopting guidelines for discretionary review of development projects for the city of Rockford, Winnebago, and Ogle County. That's LU5. This is implemented as needed. We would recommend this to be continued, and again, using those 22 and 27 NEMs. LU8 is the voluntary acquisition of single-family residences on Black Hawk Island. That is fully implemented, and we're recommending this to be withdrawn from the NCP. The homes that were inside the noise contours on Black Hawk Island were purchased by the airport, and that is near airport property. LU9 is the redevelopment of airport-owned parcels located along Kishwaukee Street south of Research Parkway. This was approved. The implementation of this measure is really depending on the interest of any potential developers and the availability of funding. So we'll be recommending that to be continued. LU11 is acquiring development and overflight rights via purchase of a land use navigation easement over an undeveloped parcel in the runway 7 approach. So this was a parcel to the southwest of the airport. This was fully implemented and it's being recommended to be withdrawn. So the next one is LU12, and this is offering an optional voluntary sale or sound insulation to the owner of one single family resident south of the airport in the 65 DNL contour for the 1993 NCP. This measure was fully implemented. The airport purchased that property, and we're recommending this measure to be withdrawn since that is fully implemented and that property was purchased. LU13 is encouraging the city of Rockford and Winnebago County to require plat notes on new subdivision plats and to record the notes on deeds for new subdivisions within the airport noise overlay zones. So we'll show you the zones here in a moment, but essentially that is just wanting the city of Rockford and Winnebago County to provide some type of note on the subdivision plats and deeds, just to make everyone aware that this property is really close to the airport and you may experience aircraft noise. To date, though, the airport noise contours are not referenced in any local subdivision ordinances. We would recommend this to be continued and actually implemented by the city in Winnebago County to put this into effect, and also use the 2022 and 2027 NEMs. Land use measure 14. This is the encouragement of Winnebago County, City of Rockford, Village of New Milford, Village of Davis Junction, not to allow an increase in residential density in the agricultural priority or rural residential zoning districts. And that's really for in Winnebago County. So that was for the 60 DNL noise contour of the 2028 NCP. We are recommending for this to be continued with a modification to show those 2022 and 2027 NEMs. However, to date, based on the zoning ordinances in Winnebago County, the allowable residential densities in those agricultural and rural residential zones have been increased since I believe this was implemented in the 2003 NCP. So since then, though, there has been a slight increase in the number of persons allowed per acre in these zones. So we would still encourage that number be held steady and not increased. So the airport noise overlay zones. So we have multiple zones. We have 3 zones: zone AC1, zone AC2, and zone AC3. So within each one of these zones, different types of land uses would be prohibited. For zone AC1, which is the area off airport property and in between the 60 and the 65 DNL contour. So you see the 60 DNL contour goes out quite a bit further there than the 65 DNL contour. But within that 60 to 65 range, things like mobile homes, hospitals, amphitheaters, and resorts or outdoor camps would be restricted. The next zone is that zone AC2. That is the areas that are off airport property and within the 65 DNL noise contour. So in those areas, things that are recommended for land use restrictions would be residential single family and multifamily units if they're also in zone 3. So we'll show you zone AC3 here in a moment. And other items like educational services, medical facilities, cultural activities, which include places of worship. Those are the types of land use restrictions that we would recommend for these areas. The last area is the area kind of right off the runway in there. There's already kind of runway safety areas and things in that area. But this area, we would actually recommend land use restrictions for exclusion of residential and single family, multifamily units, educational institutions, hotels, motels, libraries and museums, any type of sports and amusement arenas, parks that are indoor and outdoor. So the pink areas right there off the runway ends would have probably the most stringent of restrictions for all of the zones. We'll go ahead and take a break here to go over any kind of questions, or if anybody has a hand. We do have a Q&A. So we do have a question here. As I'm reaching out in hope of remedial mitigation of the noise levels in our neighborhood northeast of 20th and Samuelson. I'm assuming the noise is from the final approach of arrivals. I've lived here for 36 years, and I can tell you the disruption and annoyance has increased significantly in the last 5 years. I'd like to know how the noise levels were measured. Is it possible to have someone come out and measure again from our home? The planes are quite literally shaking our single family home. So Allison, as far as noise measurements, we do not use noise measurements when we model the noise. There's a piece of software that the FAA approves to run noise contours, and we have to use that. So what we use the noise measurements for, if we do noise measurements, is to just check the noise model to make sure it's pushing out the right amount of noise. So really measuring noise at a home, and if that noise goes over a certain level, that's not going to really kind of get you into a noise contour. So it's really based on that noise contour and where it is in respect to the homes, and not noise measurements. So hopefully that kind of answered your question on kind of doing noise measurements and how those relate to the noise contour. All right. And we'll go ahead and do the next one here. All right. So land use mitigation screening. So we looked at additional land use options as well. So corrective and remedial are the first ones there. So we looked at offering a residential sound insulation program for single and multifamily homes within the 65 DNL noise contour and the defined block rounding areas. So those are the areas kind of outside of the 65 DNL contour that I mentioned. And this would reduce the interior noise levels for the homes impacted within the 65 DNL contour and that block rounding area outside of the 65. Some of the drawbacks there are final eligibility for each of the properties would need to be determined. The final cost would still be determined based on participation rates and the cost to implement. But based on that ability to provide benefits to those homes within the 65 DNL noise contour and that block rounding area, we are recommending this for inclusion in the NCP, so offering a residential sound insulation program. The next item there is offering avigation easements to owners of occupied single and multifamily homes if they decline the sound insulation. So this has the potential to convert owner-occupied residential housing units into compatible use, and then properties would remain as taxable land. However, final eligibility would still need to be determined in the final cost based on the number of participants that would decline sound insulation would be determined later in the process. But this measure does have the ability to convert impacted properties to compatible uses. So we would be recommended this for inclusion into the NCP. The last three items here. First is adopting improved building codes. So it would recommend updating existing building codes to ensure that any type of new residential construction or any type of additions to an existing structure meet FAA criteria for the sound insulation. And that would be within zones AC1 and AC2. The drawback there is that alternative would likely increase the overall cost of residential construction in the area. But this measure will also require potential builders to use high quality materials during construction to reduce the noise within residential structures that are within that 60 DNL contour. Based on those benefits, we are recommending this for inclusion into the NCP. The next item is developing a voluntary fair disclosure program for the resale of properties. So this would essentially disclose through regulations on the seller or their representatives at the time of the sale that an existing property could be subjected to high levels of aircraft noise. This would kind of alert potential buyers that they're going to be aware before they purchase the property that they're within these two noise overlay zones And that way no one, you know, comes back a month later and was like, wow, look, with all these planes, I'd had no idea that they would be flying over. This kind of ensures that they would be made aware beforehand. Some of the drawbacks there is we would need to seek cooperation from the city of Rockford and Winnebago County, along with any type of local Rockford realtors to actually get them to participate in this. However, benefits though to folks within the 60 and the 65 DNL, we would recommend that for inclusion in the NCP. Final one there is rezoning of parcels within AC1 and AC2. This measure would really attempt to prevent future non-compatible development and land uses within that AC1 and AC2 zones. It does have a drawback of a potential loss of tax base, dependent on what that future zoning designation would be. So, you know, removing residential land use and putting in agricultural open space or changing it to commercial or industrial, those would all have effects on the tax base. But based on local land use regulations and ordinances, residential and other incompatible land uses are permitted within compatible zoning such as commercial or industrial. So even if a property was changed, let's say from residential to commercial and industrial, the way the ordinances are written is that there could be a special use permitted, which would be residential. And so for really changing the zoning really does not make the land compatible, just for the fact that it could still be used as a residential purpose. So based on the fact that it fails to meet the FAA guidance for effectively preventing incompatible land use due to local land use guidelines, we would not recommend this for inclusion in the NCP. Just for a summary here for our land use mitigation recommendations. So 8 measures are recommended for continuation with modification. 1 measure is recommended for continuation. 3 measures are recommended to be withdrawn, and 4 new measures are recommended for inclusion into the 2022 NCP. We'll go ahead and take a break here shortly and see, does anyone have any questions on the land use mitigation options and the screening that was performed? Okay, go ahead and continue on here. Okay. And I'll go ahead now and turn things over to Alan. Alan is going to talk a little bit about the land use mitigations, the corrective and remedial options that we're proposing for the 2022 NCP.
Thanks, Jesse. I'm going to talk about the 4 new measures that Jesse mentioned there in the end, and go into a little bit more detail since it actually affects a bit more of the community. Measure LU15 that he talks about, sound insulation of residential properties within boundaries that we've called the noise mitigation program areas, NMPA 1 and 2, and I'll go into those in a minute. However, not all the properties within those areas will be eligible for sound insulation. Some people may decline. It's based on interior noise tests for eligibility. And it's also based on the age of the property. Some properties may be too new and may be excluded from sound insulation. Measure LU16 offer navigational easements to owner-occupied single multifamily homes within that NMPA 1 area. That's if sound insulation is declined. The homeowner has the option to have a navigation easement purchased on the property, which basically is the right of overflight from the airport that they're going to do anyways, but it basically makes the house compatible in exchange for a small cash payment. It's not a lot of money generally. Something that would have to be determined by a consultant once they get into that. Next slide, please. So the NMPA area number 1 is all the homes that are within the 65 contour, and that maroon chartreuse, I'm not sure what color you'd call that, down on the southwest of the airport on the approach to runway 7, that's the Woodcrest Estate subdivision. And then up on the northeast on the approach to runway 25, there's some homes on Samuelson, Radnor Road, and in the Valley Pines subdivision. A total, you can see down below there, 37 single-family homes, 60 multifamily homes that are impacted. Next slide. So down to the southwest, this is the Woodcrest Estates subdivision. There's 30 single-family properties that are located within the 65 contour. And you'll see a couple of the properties technically look outside the contour, but the majority of the property or the contour actually touches the residential building itself. So they're considered in the 65 contour. So those 30 single-family units to the southwest would be offered sound insulation. Call this NMPA 1A. And Area 1B is up to the northeast. We have 4 properties along Samuelson Road, 3 along Radnor Drive, and 16, there's 8 duplexes or 16 residential units that are in the Valley Pines subdivision. That's Revelation Lane and Valley Pines Drive there. So a total of 7 more single family units and 16 multifamily units would be eligible for sound insulation there. We also identified an area called NMPA 2. Now this is areas that are outside the 65, basically contiguous subdivision to the areas that we identified. And there's an additional 55 units, single family units, and 40 multifamily units, both to the southwest and the northeast of the airport. These areas were, we call them block rounding areas. We had discussions with the FAA, and we've had tentative approval to include those areas in the mitigation program. So if you look down to the southwest, there's the original 30 homes that I think were in the subdivision. There's an additional 20 homes there, Woodcrest Parkway, Horizon Drive, that are located between the 65 and the 60 contour. So it's kind of a logical breakpoint that we're allowed to do, cutting it off with a significant arterial street like Kishwaukee, kind of cuts off easily that subdivision, but it makes it whole by including that whole subdivision in the mitigation program. Similar to the northeast, you'll see the 4 properties to the west there in green along Samuelson. We've gone to include the rest of the properties on Samuelson there. In the Valley Pines subdivision, we've included the rest of the subdivision, since it's a logical breakpoint there with Samuelson and open space with that. And also all the rest of the properties there in orange, they're Radnor Drive, Wellington Street, Carlisle Drive, Chesterfield, and 20th. There is that one property there, Jess, if you can highlight it, that one is on 20th Street, that far east one. Yeah, that's on 20th Street, but it's contiguous to that whole kind of neighborhood. And Samuelson is the east-west street. So those additional properties, 35 more single-family units and 40 multifamily units that are also included in NMPA 2 area. We call it B, C, and D. So those total homes, if you take a look at the total housing units down on the southwest and northeast of the airport, within the 65 contour and NNPA 1, there's a total of 53 housing units that are eligible for sound insulation or aviation easement. If you add in NMPA 2, which is the areas outside, kind of rounding off, block rounding the neighborhoods, we add an additional 95 housing units into that for a total of 148. Approximately just under 400 people we estimate live in those homes. So those would all be eligible for sound insulation. So what's the cost on that? It's a guess at this point. When you go in and sound insulate a home, you offer them acoustical windows and doors. If they don't have central air is offered, so the house could be closed up and made tight to reduce noise. There may be some other things like acoustical roof vents and attic insulation and things like that to mitigate noise. But we estimate, and it's a guess, it all depends on the size of the house and the amount of work that's done on it, but about $62,500 per house. That's for all homes that are in the noise mitigation program area 1 and 2. So it's a little, just under $9.2 million we estimate for the cost of the sound insulation program. And that's usually done with an 80-20 split. FA pays 80% of that. The airport pays their local share about 20%. And again, that's kind of a max number. Not everybody may want to participate. Not everybody may be eligible based on the acoustical testing. A few homes may drop out because the homes are too new, and by FA regulation, we're not allowed to treat those homes. So that number may go down a little bit. And down below there, you can just see the breakout by 3.3 million are the homes that are in the 65, and the rest is outside the 65. So any questions with that? I don't see any Q&A there. So those two options are the corrective or remedial mitigation measures. Basically, we're trying to reduce the noise that's already out there on the properties that are out there. The other two options that Jesse talked about are preventative land use mitigation, where we try to prevent any future impacts and incompatibilities. So LU 17 and 18, LU 17 was improving the building codes, which is basically taking a look at the existing building codes and making sure that they meet current sound insulation guidelines, that the walls with insulation, windows, doors provide a certain level of noise reduction. And this would be for areas within the AC1 and AC2, within the pretty much within the 60 DNL that Jesse was talking about. And this would be for any new development, new housing, and maybe even major remodeling that goes on there. So if something new goes in there, they're going to be built to standards that would be acceptable for interior noise. And the last measure, the fair disclosure program, basically just letting people know that if they're moving into the area, that they may be subjected to aircraft noise impacts. You either do it through official recording on the property deed at the time of sale, or it's something that is informal mailing of notices to the community. Again, with those within those AC1 and AC2 areas, just so people know that they might be moving into an area where there might be aircraft noise impacts. And it happens all the time. People move in and it's like, I didn't know there was an airport there. Well, this way they can't say they didn't if they were on the deed at closing. So next slide there. The cost of these are pretty much pretty minimal. It's mostly administrative kind of paperwork stuff, building code updates. We took a wag at that, 25,000. Again, 80-20 split between the FA and the airport. And the fair disclosure program is pretty much, again, minimal cost, just an airport share there. So pretty minimal cost there to try and reduce any future noise impacts. And back to Q&A before turn it back to Jesse. Looks like we got one, Jesse.
Okay. April, will a recording of this webinar be available to the public to review later? Yes, April, we will be posting this meeting to the public website. It'll probably take us a day or so to kind of get the video uploaded to the website, but it will be there. And as well, the first public workshop is already on the website, as well as the first advisory committee meeting. Both of those meetings and the presentations are on the website, so they can be viewed at any time. All right. I see no more hands. Okay, we'll go ahead and advance our slides here. So that last element that we had mentioned previously was the program management measures. And these are really the measures that help the airport run the program and maintain and make sure it's actually working. So OM1 is monitoring the compliance with the recommended noise abatement measures, doing contour updates on a 5-year cycle, and any land use implementation assistance that's needed from the airport. This is currently implemented, and we would recommend that to be continued. OM2 is the noise complaint response system and computer database. So this is really partially implemented, as the airport does record noise complaints that they get. They kind of have it in an informal database. So what we would be recommending is for this to continue, but to also have modifications to make it more of a formal process, potentially even having a place on the airport's website where you can go and make a noise complaint and have like a noise complaint form, or potentially offering something like a noise complaint hotline for people to call and make complaints. So we are recommending that to continue, but we're going to have some modifications in the recommendations just to have that be a more formal process for the airport. Excuse me. OM3 is to plan and review an evaluation. GRA staff periodically review the NCP and kind of consider if revisions or refinements are necessary. So the airport does that already, and we would just recommend that to be continued, making sure to review the NCP and make sure any, if any refinements or modifications are needed based on new traffic, just to make sure that, the airport staff is staying aware of that. OM4 is establishing a pilot and community awareness program. That was approved. It is, however, not implemented, but we would recommend that to be continued if at some point that is something that the airport would like to establish. OM5 is the publication of instrument departure procedures for runway 19, 19, and 25. That was improved. It has not been implemented, but recommended to be continued. So if at some point the airport finds that it does need to develop and publish new departure procedures, this would give the airport that kind of approved pathway to do that. OM6 is updating the airport information in the airport facilities directory and keeping that information updated. That is implemented and recommended to be continued. So some of the screening analysis that we did there, like I mentioned, formal logging of noise complaints. This would really provide the airport staff with data on any type of potential or emerging noise issues around the airport. And it also kind of captures all of the information that's needed in order to review a noise complaint, investigate the noise complaint, and actually respond to the noise complaint. Some of the drawbacks there, though, there would be some costs for staff to maintain either the website, the hotline, and responding to noise complaints, and logging those complaints in some type of formal manner. So our evaluation and recommendation is the airport staff should continue to receive noise complaints on an as required basis, but due to the low level that they're receiving, acquiring a real formal noise complaint system is not recommended, but that more formal system of complaint logging should be used by the airport, and that information used as a basis for any types of future meetings where noise issues are discussed. So we would be recommending for the present system of logging noise complaints to be continued with some type of modification and modification essentially to that already approved OM2 measure. Initiating a noise monitoring program. So this would essentially be the installation of permanent or temporary noise monitors in the communities around the airport. This would provide the airport with information regarding the aircraft noise levels in the communities around the airport. Drawbacks to that, though, it's very expensive to purchase these noise monitoring devices. Not only are you purchasing it, you have to install it, and then there's going to be continual maintenance on those pieces of equipment. And then you also have to have time to download the data, analyze the data, and correlate that data as well. So there's a lot of expenses that go along with the noise monitoring program. But due to the low level of noise complaints and the cost to implement, maintain the noise monitoring system and program, we would not be recommending that for future analysis at this time. So in summary there, for the program management recommendations, so 5 of the previously approved program management measures are recommended for continuation. 1 measure is recommended for continuation with modification, and that being the formal logging of noise complaints. So some of the costs associated with that, continuing logging of the noise complaints, it's really just that administrative cost that is associated with some type of GRA staff that is assigned to collect that data and put it into a database, research the complaint, and then respond to the noise complaint. Initiating the community roundtable or a noise abatement committee. Again, really minimal administrative costs for some GRA staff to attend meetings and set those meetings up. The last one there, the perform regular updates to the NEMs and review of the NCP. So typically those, we just kind of have some estimation prices there though. And again, that would be available for that 80-20 FAA local share split. Typically an NEM update runs around $350,000 to $400,000, along with any type of the public workshops that go along with that. And then updating an NEM and any NCP ranges from about $650,000 to $750,000, depending on the amount of probably impacts and anticipated work that would be involved within the study itself. We'll go ahead and stop there and see if anybody has any questions about the program management measures that are in place and what we're recommending.
There is one question there, Jesse.
Okay. So Allison Holman, how do we make a formal noise complaint today? So currently, I don't think there's an actual hotline or anything like that you can call, but just contacting the airport and the actual offices, the Rockford Airport Authority offices, you can make a noise complaint to those folks.
Oh, Jesse, you
Yep.
can give her we can give her a 24-hour number to operations. I can type it in the chat for her. Then that way she can get a hold of one of the ops specialists anytime, and that way we get it logged.
There we go. That would be how that is done today. But obviously, once we start looking into that, that might change, and it might, have more of a formal noise hotline or an actual website that you can go and log that complaint. But that's kind of where we were leading in with that, to make it a little bit more easily accessible for the communities to find that information and make a noise complaint if they wanted to. Okay. All right. So now we'll go into some of the next steps. So again, the next steps in the process there, you'll see down here in the bottom left corner, we're going to be looking to draft the noise compatibility program and noise the documents. We'll have those draft documents for public review and also holding a public hearing. And then just the recommended noise compatibility program and the final NEMs. And then we submit that information to the FAA, which they review and provide any type of approval or disapproval of the measures within the study itself. But coming up though, just gathering input and acceptance of the noise abatement, land use mitigation, and program management measures. First, we kind of show all this information to the advisory committee and look to gather input from them, which we've done. And then we gather input from the public, which we're attempting to do right now with the public workshop, and then putting that information on the website to gather comments from the public. Then we will also look to gather input from the Rockford Airport Authority, as well as the ATC and FAA. Will take all of that input, make any modifications to the program that we see fit based on that input from all those sources. And then finally there, we'll look to get GRAA acceptance of the NCP recommendations. That kind of being the final piece of, once the airport authority is happy with what we're recommending, that's when we'll really kind of move forward with submitting the draft documentation and trying to get approval. So some of the really close in next steps will just be start preparing materials for that next advisory committee meeting, as well as the next public workshop. I will note that next public workshop will be the last one. So we'll have a public workshop, and then right after that, in the same time frame, we'll have a public hearing where formal comments can be made, and those can be written comments and or verbal comments that are given during the public hearing. Then we'll prepare that draft NEM and NCP documentation and get that to the FAA and look for their approval. And then we'll also be gathering any comments on that preliminary draft documentation that is made available during the public hearing. Do we have any kind of final questions on the next steps and kind of where we're going after the meeting and kind of what the road ahead has in store. Allison, do you have a date for the public hearing? We do not have a date set currently. If I had to guess, I would say probably sometime in later January to March, probably January, February, March, somewhere in that first quarter of 2023, we would be looking to have that public hearing. So we have to have the FAA has to have the time to review the document. It's a pretty lengthy document, so it takes them a little bit of time to review that. Once we get their feedback, we'll make any adjustments, and obviously any comments or feedback we get from the public, we use that to make adjustments to the document before submitting to the FAA. But that's when I would anticipate some type of public hearing, is probably first quarter 2023. Another comment. I am a reporter with 23 News. Would you or Alan be available for an interview to talk about the study and where you go from here? Yeah, I think we would be available for an interview. If you want my contact information, or if you wanted to just kind of contact the airport and look to set something up, we could definitely arrange that. And then I will type my email in there just so you have that. But as well, you can also get a hold of us through the website, and we can start some communication there. But I just sent you my email address so we can arrange something for an interview. Okay, do we have any more questions? We do have operations number Q&A. How can I find out once the date is decided? Allison's asking. For the public hearing, we will be putting ads in the newspaper. We'll obviously have notices. Anybody that's on this meeting now, we have your email address, and we'll be able to send out meeting notifications to everybody on the meeting. So for the next meeting, you'll actually get an invitation to the meeting. Now that we have your contact information, we'll be able to kind of keep you informed on that upcoming meeting. But again, it'll be on the website again, where you would go to register. We'll have the public hearing will be announced in a newspaper circulating in Rockford at least 30 days before the meeting. And we'll usually have like a reminder about a week or two before the meeting. We also release information via media outlets if they choose to cover that information and make that information available. So those are kind of what we use to get that information out to the public. I will say that Barb Chidley has also kind of assisted us in getting the word out to some of the local neighborhoods and communities. So a very big kudos to Barb for helping us get the information out about the meetings and when they are, and how to register for them. Okay. Let's see. Right. Does anyone else have any questions or things that they would like to discuss? Well, if anybody does have any questions, they, didn't feel comfortable asking it in this forum, definitely feel free, go to the public website, send us a comment, ask your questions on there. It comes directly to me. And, definitely more than happy to respond. And if we need to have some type of coordination call where we kind of look at some things more in depth, more than happy to provide that assistance to anybody. So if something pops up later, feel free to get a hold of us, and we can work through any of the questions at a later date as well. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, I will thank everybody for joining us tonight. Definitely thank you for the comments and the questions. I understand that it's definitely a touchy subject with aircraft noise, and hopefully the airport deciding to move forward with a sound insulation program and mitigate some of the homes near the airport is a step in the right direction for mitigation in the future. And hopefully it's something that the folks that live near the airport are probably going to appreciate greatly. So with that, though, I'll thank everybody, and definitely look for the public hearing notice. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us via email. All right. Thank you, folks.
Thank you all.